3rd Annual ABAA New York International Antiquarian Book Fair, now through Sunday, at Park Avenue Armory. More information at nybookfair.com.
WNYC is built by listener support. Grassroots donations from our community support reporting from the WNYC Newsroom, NPR, and the BBC. Keeping you informed and connected to events in our community and the world is our commitment to you. Please commit to us with your financial contribution today. Become a member now. Just text the letters WNYC to 70101 or visit WNYC.org and click on Donate.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by EquityZen Securities LLC. With EquityZen funds, accredited investors can invest in the private companies shaping the future before they go public at equityzen.com/radio.
We are going to do the week that was, of course. We'll do some banking regulation, and then we'll go house shopping. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Bitwarden, a password manager for businesses designed to securely store, share, and manage credentials for employees. Learn more at bitwarden.com. And by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by Netscope, optimized, secure access to SaaS, web, and private apps for people on any device, anywhere they go. NETSKOPE.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Rizdal. It is Friday today, the 28th day of April. Good as always to have you along, everybody. This has been a week filled by economic data. Next week will be a week filled by a Fed decision and its fallout. And today came a little central bank mea culpa. Though that might not be the right word, actually. We can talk about that. Gina Smilek's at the New York Times. Neela Richardson is at ADP. Hey, you two.
Hi, Kai.
Hey, Kai.
So, Neela, let me start with you. I want to do big picture, and I would like your thoughts on the state of this economy, given what we learned this week. Gross domestic product growth, 1.1% for the first quarter. Inflation came out today, PCE, the Fed's favorite measure, down. I mean, it's still elevated, but it's down. Moderating, I guess, is what people might say about inflation right now. What's your sense? What's your gut?
It's cooling and it's sticky. Usually, Kai, it's hot and sticky, but if you look at the GDP numbers, they've cooled down. Down from the fourth quarter number, which is 2.6%, down to 1.1%, elevated by consumer spending, which was strong in the quarter, but looked a little lackluster by the end of the month. And then sticky because inflation was sticky, especially when you look at the Fed's preferred measure, the PCE price index. If you look at what employers were spending on wages and benefits, that looks sticky. It looks like that wage growth, though moderating a little bit over the course of several months, it's not going down fast enough back to that 2% level.
All right, so hold that thought on wages. We'll come back to that. Gina, I want you to paint a picture for me as Jay Powell sits back and observes the economy as of right now, getting ready for the big meeting next week. What's he thinking? And take all the words you need. No need to limit yourself to 5.
Thank you for that. Well, I think that Chair Powell is probably thinking a lot of thoughts, so it's a good thing I have more than 5. Right. He's in a pretty tough situation here. I mean, on one hand, you've got continued turmoil in the banking sector, which is, bad news from the Fed's perspective in the sense that it slows the economy down, but not in a super predictable way. It's hard to guess exactly how much that's going to matter to growth. At the same time, we have growth, but certainly not sort of pulling back at the kind of speed that you might think it would after this much Fed action. And so, what the realized data, what the data we have in hand are telling you and what you're expecting based on this banking stuff, those are probably two somewhat different things. And I think that makes for a pretty hard communications challenge for Chair Powell, because he's going to have to come out after this meeting and say, hey, here's what we think we're going to do next on interest rates. And how do you know that with any certainty at this moment? It's a pretty hard line to walk.
Does it amaze you, Neil? Sorry, I do want to get to wages in a second, but does it amaze you that here we are 3 years after the height of the worst of the pandemic, and we're still kind of going, I don't know, with this economy?
Well, the economy's changed. It's changed a lot over those last 3 years. Workers have changed, their expectations have changed, but also the impact of Fed policy in the labor market is not doing what it's done historically. And so that leaves the Fed a little flummoxed. They're like, wait, something's supposed to happen when we hike rates in the labor market, and it's not happening. We're still at 3.5% unemployment rate. That rivals historical lows, and we're still seeing wage growth that doubles in some sectors, triple what that growth was before the pandemic. And so that's the issue for the Fed, is that the traditional levers aren't leading to the same results.
So, Neil, on wages, which you note are still, nicely elevated based on historical comparisons, does that concern you in the stickiness of inflation?
No, because it really doesn't, because right now the big concern heading into all of this for economists was the idea of the wage price spiral. Right. It's the dreaded nightmare. It's the villain in every superhero movie on inflation, in which wages chase prices, chase wages, and you can't get out of this inflation spiral. We're not seeing that. Wages may be keeping inflation up a little higher and more sticky, but they're not driving inflation. And what they're actually doing is supporting consumer spending, which is necessary to get the GDP growth that we've seen. And even that was not enough to get to 2%. So this is a real puzzle for the Fed. How do you keep that soft landing intact and still bring down inflation? That's the puzzle they're trying to figure out starting again next week.
Gina, I want to turn to another puzzle for the Fed, which is the report today from Michael Barr, the vice chair for supervision, on Silicon Valley Bank and what the Fed did, or more accurately, might not have done. He didn't pull too many punches, Mr. Barr did, in saying the Fed failed.
Yeah. What a report.
Yeah.
This is pretty surprising. The Fed is not an institution that's known for being hugely self-critical, but this was a very blunt report that basically said supervisors messed up, regulators messed up, this was a failing on the part of the central bank. They clearly, something went wrong because the bank crashed, but what it really documented and laid out in pretty excruciating detail is that at every turn, things got missed, things weren't followed up on. This was a sort of series of unfortunate mistakes that really resulted in a pretty painful situation that didn't necessarily have to happen in the way it did. And so I think it was interesting to read. It also is probably going to have pretty big implications for the future of regulation. Vice Chair Barr laid out a bunch of things that he plans to change going forward.
Yeah, so there's what the Fed can do internally, right? But do you expect any, and look, I get that you're a Federal Reserve reporter and not necessarily a political reporter, but do you expect external review of this? I mean, Barr said he welcomes an external review, but then again, more action from the outside, Congress specifically.
I don't know if we'll get the external review, although it would be really interesting to have one. I do think that what we will definitely get is some pretty significant regulatory changes, regardless of whether Congress acts here, because I think the dirty little secret of the types of regulations that went wrong here is that while some of them did tie back to things that Congress passed in 2018, a lot of them offered the Fed quite a lot of discretion in implementation. There were a lot of ways the Fed could have chosen to go about applying the regulatory rollbacks that Congress had asked for. And so that also means on the flip side that the Fed can do quite a lot on its own to tighten those rules back up.
Yeah, just a point of clarification here, right? There were two main questions after SVB collapse, right? One was supervisory failure, and the other was regulatory failure. And what I hear you saying and what the report says, I think, is we had both.
Yeah. I think that it's definitely what this report says. Absolutely. It says, this was a sort of a across the board failure, and we need to work on both going forward. And, I think the kinds of regulations and supervisory problems that they pointed out are things that the Fed can do in-house. It might take a few years. It might take them time to do it. They might have to go through a rulemaking process, but they can do a lot of it without having to go back to Congress.
Gina Smialek of the New York Times and Neil Richardson at ADP on a Friday afternoon. Thanks, you two.
Thanks, Kai.
Thanks, Kai.
Have a great weekend. Wall Street went out on a high this Friday. We will have the details when we do the numbers. The Fed's report on SVB notwithstanding, if you had to bet on the next shoe to drop in this banking situation that we find ourselves in, you could do worse than picking First Republic. The San Francisco-based bank started the year with its share price at $123 apiece. Remember that number. And then came Silicon Valley Bank and Signature and depositor panics. And today, after 26 halts to trading in FRC shares today because of excessive volatility, First Republic closed down another 43% to $3.51 a share. Thing is, plenty of investors already have picked First Republic to be the next banking shoe to drop. Marketplace's Matt Levin has more now on short sellers and situations like this.
Short sellers make money when they borrow a stock, sell it immediately, and then buy it back at a lower value. They want stocks to go down in price. And for the past few months, short sellers have loved rooting against one particular type of company, regional banks.
Shorts are up 36%. In the whole sector. So basically it was like shooting fish in a barrel. All these banks took a big drop in stock price.
Ihor Desnewski heads predictive analytics for S3 Partners. They're a data company that tracks this type of thing. He says short sellers really took aim at one very lucrative fish.
First Republic shorts were up 1.2 billion. That's billion with a B. It was a fantastic trade for them.
Now, if you're the FDIC or the Fed and your job is to prevent banks from failing, you may not like the idea of investors wagering that a bank is going to go down in flames, especially in a moment when people are kind of panicked about the financial system generally. Xu Jian is a professor at Duke's Fuqua School of Business.
They don't really know which banks are good, which banks are bad. So that generates opportunities for short sellers to spread rumors.
John says that's why the SEC temporarily banned short selling of financial stocks during the 2008 financial crisis. But prohibiting short selling for bank stocks could be counterproductive, says finance professor Chester Spatt at Carnegie Mellon.
Suppose what we did was we banned short sales last Monday. What do we think would have happened then? The ban would have immediately triggered a run.
Depositors might say, well, if the government is stopping people from betting that First Republic might fail, things must be pretty bad, and would withdraw whatever's left of their deposits. I'm Matt Levin for Marketplace.
Two of the most giant of oil giants reported profits today. Between them, Chevron and ExxonMobil had a combined $18 billion in net income the first 3 months of the year. 11.5 for XOM, that's the ticker, $6.5 billion for CVX. That is down from last year's record profits after Russia's invasion of Ukraine hit energy markets real hard. But even though oil prices are down, the business remains plenty profitable, thanks in large part to their refining sections. Marketplace's Lily Jamali is on the energy beat for us.
Exxon and Chevron have stakes in all three big chunks of the petroleum supply chain, says Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy Group.
There's what we call upstream, where you're drilling for crude oil in the fields.
Then there's midstream, which is the transport of that oil. And finally, downstream, which is refineries heating it up.
And you're turning it into the products that consumers use every day.
Exxon's refinery business helped lead the company to its most profitable first quarter ever. Last month, it expanded a refinery in Texas, but that's the exception since the pandemic started 3 years ago.
2020 was complete chaos.
David Rysard of the consultancy Argus Media says pretty much everybody stopped driving and flying, which left refineries with a big problem.
They had to pay people to take crude off their hands at one point. And I think there was real concerns about how long this would go on.
Since then, at least a half a dozen major refineries have stopped producing gasoline. Industry observers say that's why fuel prices have stayed high, even as crude prices have fallen. Trey Cowan with the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis says Exxon and Chevron have done well as prices have slipped because they have stakes in refining and drilling.
If oil prices are high, you're making more money on that side. But when oil prices are low, then you're making more money on the refining side.
And the whole industry is looking at an increase in demand as more drivers hit the road this summer. I'm Lily Jamali for Marketplace.
Coming up.
And once you move on, you can't live with regrets.
Oh, ain't that the truth? First, though, let's do the numbers. Dow Industrial is up 272 today, 0.8%, 34,098. The Nasdaq lifted 84 points, about 0.7%, 12,226. The S&P 500 found 34 points, 0.8%, 41,69 there. For the week, the Dow and the S&P each gained about 0.9%. Nasdaq rose 1.3%. Lily Jamali was talking to us about oil companies. ExxonMobil up 1.3%. Chevron rose almost 1%. Today, Americans are less confident than they were a year ago that they're going to have enough money to live comfortably in retirement. So says the Employee Benefit Research Institute. 64% of workers very or somewhat confident that they would have enough. That is, however, down 9 percentage points from last year. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by ChargePoint. ChargePoint lets electric vehicle drivers charge wherever they are, at home, at work, or on the go. Learn more at ChargePoint.com. ChargePoint, driving a better way. And by Brave, a software company dedicated to making the web safer, more private, and easier to use. Brave's web browser features built-in privacy protection against ads, trackers, fingerprinting, and more. Learn more at brave.com. And by The Uncertain Hour, a Marketplace podcast investigates the privatization of welfare and how for-profit companies cash in on policies that require welfare recipients to work for their benefits. Listen to The Uncertain Hour wherever you get your podcasts.
Support for WNYC comes from resources and digital tools designed to help local to global companies make moves for their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/banking for business.
As hip-hop once dictated, cash rules everything around me. But do we even know what that means? I'm Kai Wright, and I don't know about you, but I have never truly understood much about money and all that goes into managing it. Self-described financial hype woman Berna Anat says that's precisely what makes a lot of us vulnerable in this economy. This week on Notes from America, the Money Talk. Sunday evening at 6 on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace here on WNYC. Stay with us for All Things Considered that continues at 7 o'clock. 54 degrees right now, rain tonight, a low of 48 degrees, expecting rain all day tomorrow as well, with a steady temperature staying in the low 50s. This is WNYC.
Master Voices production of Gilbert and Sullivan.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Rizdal. If you are flying this summer, as you probably already know, it is going to be crowded. If you're flying this summer into or out of New York City, forget about it. Some big airlines are cutting service there. 10% already at JetBlue, United and Delta, something similar. Others, almost certainly the same thing. New York is one of the busiest air traffic hubs in the country, if not the world. So why is this happening? Marketplace's Henry Epp has the answer.
There are basically too many planes flying in and out of LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark airports. So Matthew Lehner, an assistant administrator at the Federal Aviation Administration, says the FAA asked airlines to drop some flights.
What we said is that we need to have a bigger buffer in New York. There's a lot of international traffic that is coming back this summer that we didn't have last summer.
Bottom line, says Jason Rabinowitz, an aviation industry blogger,
there are just too many aircraft for the current FAA staffing levels, especially here in New York.
Air traffic controllers have been in short supply for years, and the pandemic made the problem worse. And while staffing has recovered a bit across the country, New York has just over half of the air traffic controllers it needs, according to the FAA. Rabinowitz says training new ones will take years.
Really, it's just how many people can they attract to this high-stress job as quickly as possible and get them trained up as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, it seems like they haven't been able to go as fast as anyone would have liked.
The FAA says cutting flights in New York is a short-term fix and will make for a smoother and safer summer. Still, David Slotnick at The Points Guy says the staff shortage could lead to more chaotic scenes at airports, especially if there's bad weather.
You could be delayed for hours. You might be delayed till the next day. Whereas before, it was at least a little bit more predictable to know how the airlines were going to recover from everything.
So maybe pack some extra snacks if you're flying this summer. And if you're looking for a job, the FAA is hiring. I'm Henry Epp for Marketplace.
There are times you see things in this economy and you wonder, I wonder what the story is there. Marketplace's Amy Scott had that happen to her the other day. Those signs you see sometimes, depending on where you are, that say, "We buy houses," or sometimes "We buy ugly houses." And the story to be told is who is behind those signs. Often they're real estate wholesalers who make money by connecting people who want to sell their homes fast with investors paying cash. Cash to be had, to be clear, at a steep discount. A new study's been looking at that practice and found a lot of sellers would be better off just listing their houses on the market the traditional way. But, as Amy's about to tell us, there are a whole lot of reasons people might call the number on those signs.
Nicholas Chavez and his wife, Bunny Cabine, lived in a 2-story brick row house in East Baltimore for 35 years, and they took great care of it.
We did a lot of work in the house. We redid the basement, kitchen, bathroom. So it was a nice, comfortable house, and it served its purpose.
But as they got closer to retirement, Chavez from the city's Department of Public Works and Cabine as a pharmacy technician, they were ready for a change. They felt like the block was declining. Longtime neighbors had moved away, and the house didn't feel as comfortable anymore.
I'm 70. My wife is 63. And going up and down the steps and the tightness of the house,
They were tired of it. So they decided to sell the house and move into an apartment outside the city. For years, Chavez had seen the "We Buy Houses" signs everywhere. He called a bunch of the numbers and eventually found a guy named Rob Miller at True Properties.
I told him what my situation was. I told him what I wanted. He really surpassed what we were asking for.
They got $70,000. Miller didn't buy the house himself. He signed a contract to buy it and then sold that contract to an investor at a profit.
Hi there. Amy Scott, nice to meet you. Sorry, my hands are a little cold.
At Miller's office in suburban Baltimore, a whiteboard lists dozens of recent deals. He's been investing in real estate since he and his mom saw an infomercial about 20 years ago.
Everybody that's in real estate has heard the name Carlton Sheets.
Welcome to the 5 Steps to Buying Property by Carlton Sheets.
My mom looked at me and she said, "Hey, you want to split the course with me? It's $100. It's $50 a piece." I said, "All right, sure, why not?" And the course came in and I never let it down.
Sometimes Miller buys distressed properties to fix up and sell or rent out. Other times he makes money essentially matchmaking between home sellers and investors. He says, yes, people could make more money selling their houses through an agent.
But we don't charge any commission. There's no fees. There's no closing costs.
He takes houses as is, often in pretty bad shape, sometimes filled with junk. People who need to sell quickly are often going through hard times, a divorce, a death in the family, or they're deep in debt.
I'm helping people out of situations that are incredible. And it's not just about the house. You know, we actually care about the people and what you're going through.
Others see real estate wholesaling as predatory. Benjamin Price is a research fellow at Drexel University and co-author of a recent study called "We Buy Houses, You Lose Out." Researchers found that in Philadelphia, the sale prices of homes sold informally to investors were more than 50% lower on average than comparable houses sold on the multiple listing service.
The main takeaway is that homeowners who choose to work with a wholesaler are likely missing out on a higher sales price and a higher return on their investment.
Price agrees sellers may have good reasons to work with a wholesaler, like speed and convenience, but he worries people are missing out on building generational wealth, especially in historically marginalized neighborhoods where wholesalers tend to operate.
Clearly, this type of activity is harming longtime homeowners at a time when housing equity should be rising for them.
I think the bigger story here is about entire neighborhoods and communities in cities like Baltimore that are underserved by the formal housing market.
That's Christine Jang Tretian. She's writing a book about informal housing markets in Baltimore. She says because real estate agents depend on commissions, they don't have much incentive to work in neighborhoods with low home values.
So a lot of homeowners and investors I talk to in poor neighborhoods in Baltimore, they will tell you stories about how they called 5 to 10 different realtors and nobody's picked up the phone for them. It's near impossible to find a realtor. And this is kind of where wholesalers come in.
Nick Chavez, who sold his Baltimore house for $70,000 through a wholesaler, did talk with a realtor first. She thought they could maybe get $120,000, but they'd have to repaint and get inspections for lead and asbestos, and then deal with open houses and showings.
People coming in and out, and it's not worth it to me.
And he honestly seems unfazed that they could have made a lot more money. I show him a printout of state property records listing the last few transactions of the house. Okay, so one shows a sale in May of 2022 for $70,000. Would that be the investor who bought it from you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then that person turned around and sold it for $175,000 a few months later. What do you think about that?
We know that's how it goes.
Yeah, we understand.
From across the room, Kabine says, we know that's how it goes. As far as they could tell from the online listing, the investor hadn't even done much work on the house.
It was about us moving on. And once you move on, you can't live with regrets. You can't worry about, okay, they got $175,000. Hey, we got what we wanted out of it, and we're doing okay.
They love their new apartment in a luxury building with an elevator and lots of parks nearby. He says whoever bought their old house overpaid. In Baltimore, I'm Amy Scott for Marketplace.
This final note on the way out today, in which sometimes news moves faster than we can tell you about it. As I was walking into the studio to do the show this afternoon, this item crossed on Reuters that an FDIC takeover of First Republic is, quote, imminent. Given the way things have been going with that bank, nobody ought to be too surprised. The only question, well, there are going to be a bunch of questions, actually, but the biggie that's going to play out over the weekend, if that's when it happens, is what kind of deposit insurance is going to be offered. Everybody or just depositors under the FDIC's $250,000 limit?
Marketplace is supported by SoFi, the all-in-one app where members can bank, borrow, and invest. Get your money right at SoFi.com. SoFi Bank, N.A. Investment Services through SoFi Securities, LLC. And by VBrick. VBrick unlocks the power of video for customers' business processes. VBrick.com/marketplace to learn more. And by SlashNext, generative human AI security that stops business email compromise and mobile phishing scams. Businesses can compare SlashNext with their current solutions for 30 days at slashnext.com.
All right, we are going, because it is that time, but here's your moment of economic context in which it is more important than ever to choose your friends wisely. A study from the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority Investor Education Foundation, yes, that's a mouthful, and NORC at the University of Chicago shows that nearly a third of new cryptocurrency investors last year said a friend's suggestion was why they bought in. Just be careful out there. That's all I'm saying. Our theme music was composed by B.J. Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Donna Tam is the executive editor. Neil Scarborough is vice president and general manager. I'm Kai Rizdal. We will see you Monday. Everybody have yourselves a great weekend, all right? This is APN.
Master Voices production of Gilbert and Sullivan's Iolanthe. Christine Ebersol, David Garrison, and Santino Fontana star in the satirical comic opera on May 3rd at Carnegie Hall. Led by Ted Sperling. Learn more at mastervoices.org.
Support for NPR comes from member stations and from Easy Cater, committed to helping companies find food for me.